April 17th, 1942. A relentless winter on the outskirts of Berlin. A night that never entered the SS records but remained etched as the day a 28-year-old Jew, silent, precise, and with nothing left to lose, discovered that justice would not come from the heavens, but from his own hands. His name was Nathan Levinson, a former train mechanic, born in Potsdam, survivor of silence, grief, and deportation. A man who watched his wife and daughter vanish inside a sealed truck, headed toward a destination from which no one ever returned. He saw the face, he memorized the name, and he waited. Months later, fate placed Nathan inside the home of Paul Kruger, an SS commander, father of 3 sons trained to inherit an empire of fear. But on that frozen night, Nathan did not bow his head. He did not ask. He did not hesitate. With the same axe he once used to split firewood, he stepped inside, and in less than 6 minutes, he turned the commander's house into a courtroom. 3 sons, 1 father, and a sentence carried out in the dark, without witnesses, without mercy. This is the true story of Nathan Levinson. But before we continue with the video, leave a comment telling us where you're from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The hiss of steam bent around the trees like a serpent of iron, spitting ash into a sky already choked with war. April 17th, 1942. The kind of cold that makes your bones feel older than your years. Nathan Levinson stood just outside the depot near Potsdam, coat buttoned to the neck, fingers blackened with grease and silence. He was 28, a mechanic by trade, the kind who knew the language of engines better than the one spoken by men. His job wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with medals or songs. But in a world where trains decided fates, he was one of the few who touched the veins of the beast. That morning, the train came earlier than expected. No whistle, no announcements, just the thud of boots and a gray truck parked beside the maintenance shack. His wife, Rivka, had just brought him a tin of boiled potatoes wrapped in cloth. Their daughter, little Miriam, no more than 5, held her tattered cloth doll, stuffed with old newspaper and stitched with thread as red as blood. It happened fast. 3 SS officers stepped out of the truck, their coats long, their words short. The clipboard came out. Names were read. Rivka's was one of them. Nathan stepped forward, instinct before logic. "There's been a mistake," a gloved hand pressed to his chest. "Back to your post." Miriam began to cry, not loud, the kind of cry that sticks to your ribs for years after. Rivka didn't scream. She looked at Nathan and nodded once. That was all. A mother saving her last words for a moment that might still come. He saw the man who gave the order, tall, blonde, clean boots, cold eyes. Paul Kruger. The name would come later. The face stuck instantly. Rivka and Miriam were loaded into the back of the truck. The doors slammed shut. No windows. No way back. Nathan chased after the vehicle for maybe 20 steps before realizing the futility. The cold bit harder when you were alone. He stood on the tracks until the steam of the departing train swallowed the horizon. He never went home that night. The days that followed felt unreal, like living beneath water. Every sound muffled, every face a blur. He went back to work. What else could he do? Mechanics' hands don't get days off, not in wartime. He asked around, quietly at first, then louder. No one answered. A neighbor mumbled something about resettlement, another about deportation. Euphemisms dressed in Wehrmacht gray. It was an old man near the bakery who whispered the truth. "There's a farm east of here," he said, voice thin as parchment. "Not a farm, a place. Model settlement, they call it. People go there. They don't write back." That night, Nathan walked to the edge of the village. Through the trees, he saw it, a white house, surrounded by fences and perfectly spaced pines. German efficiency in architecture and cruelty. And there, standing in the garden, was him, Paul Kruger, polishing his boots in the open air. 2 blonde boys chased each other across the lawn, laughing. A woman watered a rose bush. Nathan didn't know hate until that moment. Not real hate. He didn't try to storm the house. That would have been suicide, and he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. But he returned, night after night, like a ghost learning the language of the living. He noticed things. One of the windows on the west side didn't close properly. The 3rd step on the back porch creaked. A pipe behind the kitchen leaked every other day. The dog, big, black, brutal, was let out every morning at 6, chained at 8, asleep by 10. Nathan memorized it all, like schematics of an engine. He stole a map, sketched the grounds on scraps of cloth, measured his steps, timed the guards' rotations. He became invisible. The village whispered, "That man, he hasn't spoken since the truck. He's lost his mind." No, Nathan hadn't lost it. He had found something else. Purpose. He began collecting. Not weapons, just signs. He moved a stone in the garden, an inch to the left. He trimmed a stalk on the hedge, so he'd know if someone walked past. He stepped only where the ground didn't groan. The doll, Miriam's doll, never left his coat. She was the only thing left that remembered the shape of his daughter's hands. He tied a red thread around her neck, a mark, a reminder, not just of loss, but of debt. One night, the dog barked louder than usual. Nathan had gotten too close. He froze behind a barrel as one of the boys came out to calm the animal. The boy looked out into the trees. For a second, their eyes met, but the boy turned away. Nathan knew then time was running out. He didn't sleep the next 2 days. He sharpened the blade he found in an abandoned tool shed. Not a knife, not a gun, a woodcutter's axe. Small, light, silent. On the third night, there was no moon. He wore his work shirt, white, unsuspecting, the axe wrapped in cloth, no metal to clang. He crossed the field like a memory, past the sleeping dog, past the trimmed hedge, past the stone he had moved himself. The house loomed, a theater of obedience. He slipped through the west window, the faulty one. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco and lemon polish. Footsteps upstairs, a clock ticking, a radio mumbling Wagner. His hands didn't shake, not from fear, from resolve. The first boy, Franz, was in the garden, cigarette in hand, trying to look grown. Nathan stepped forward. Franz turned. The axe fell. No scream, only breath cut short. The garden drank it in. The second, Dieter, was in the washroom. Steam everywhere. The mirror fogged. He didn't hear the door open, didn't see the shadow, but he felt the cold just before it happened. The water turned red. The third, Hans, was at his desk. Papers, a toy glider, a small tin of licorice. He reached for the radio dial. That was his last gesture. Nathan stood behind him. No rage, just gravity. The axe did the rest. He washed his hands in the fountain, folded the bloodied cloth, slid the axe behind the stove, and sat in the living room as if waiting for dinner. The doll beside him, still, footsteps above. A door opened. Paul Kruger walked in, half-dressed, face pale. He looked at Nathan, at the blood, at the empty house. His voice cracked. You killed my sons. Nathan stood. His eyes didn't flinch. You killed my family. And then came silence. The kind that settles after truth has been spoken. Kruger didn't order an execution. He didn't scream. He walked upstairs. Minutes later, the floor groaned. A rope creaked. Nathan was locked in the cellar. No chains, no trial. Just 4 walls and a flickering bulb. And then, footsteps again. Not boots, shoes. The woman, Kruger's wife. She stepped in, eyes swollen, holding something wrapped in cloth. She placed it gently beside him. The doll. No words, only the creak of the door as she left, and the sound of paper burning above. That's how it began. Not with a war, but with a train, and a man who chose not to scream. Nathan didn't sleep the night he was released. Not that anyone told him he was free. No trial, no questions, no sentence. Just a door, unlatched at dawn, and the cold breath of the forest waiting beyond it. The cellar spat him out like something unfinished, something inconvenient. He stepped into the mist without a single order barked at his back. The house behind him stood still, windows shuttered, smoke gone, and silence thick as judgment. The doll was in his coat pocket, her red thread poked through the seam. His boots, still blood-stained, pressed into soft dirt as he made for the tree line, each step an act of disobedience against a system that no longer knew what to do with him. He expected bullets, dogs, anything but the absence of noise. But they never came. They had no use for him anymore. Not as a warning, not as a witness, and definitely not as a man. The woods were colder than the cellar, not by temperature, by memory, the kind of cold that carries whispers in every gust. Nathan didn't know where he was going, only that he had to move. He passed frozen creeks, charred stumps, and abandoned guard posts overgrown with moss and rot. By dusk, he reached a broken rail line, a ghost spine, overrun with vines. A wooden platform sagged at its edge, an old freight stop no longer used, except maybe by foxes and fugitives. He slipped into a crumbling shed beside it, collapsed onto a pile of burlap sacks, and closed his eyes. He dreamt of wheels turning, and a girl laughing. Then fire. Days passed, maybe weeks. Time doesn't move the same when no one's calling your name. Nathan moved between villages, pretending to be no one, a farmer's cousin, a lost worker, a face that didn't ask for food, only work. He fixed tools in exchange for bread, repaired boots for old coats, but the rumors traveled faster than he did. They say a commander's house was attacked. 3 dead. They say it was a Jew. One of their workers went mad. Did you hear? Kruger hanged himself. No records, no trial. They burned everything. Nathan didn't speak. He only listened. Then came the letter, folded inside a soldier's ration tin, left at the foot of his bunk in an abandoned barn near Lubin. No return address, no name, just his, Nathan. Inside, a single page, typewritten. April 1942. Paul Kruger, SS. 3 sons, deceased. Farm compound vacated. May 1942. R. Feldman, Gestapo, found strangled. Dresden, June 1942. Major G. Neumann, disappeared. Warsaw Rail Yard. July 1942. H. Bittner, poisoning. No leads. And then, in red ink, underlined, "You're not alone." He read the list again and again. The names weren't familiar, but the pattern was. Men who gave orders, men who signed the fates of others, men who stopped waking up. Nathan folded the letter and tucked it inside the doll's cloth belly, not for safekeeping, for memory. He wasn't looking for revenge. That word was too clean, too theatrical. What he wanted was arithmetic. One family for another. One order for one burial. Balance. One night, while patching a leather strap in a tavern stable near the Czech border, a boy came to him, no older than 10, pale with soot-smudged cheeks and a hole in his boot. He held out a scrap of paper. "From my uncle," the boy said. "Said you'd know." Nathan unfolded it. A name, a date, a location. Field Captain Otto Hess, August 13th, rail stop near Plauen. No explanations, no maps, just coordinates. The station near Plauen was small, built of brick and old hate. It served as a checkpoint for westbound transfers, livestock, coal, people, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. It only counted bodies. Nathan arrived early. He stood by a water pump, grease on his hands, playing the role he knew best. Just another worker, another man with dirt on his boots and silence in his mouth. At 10:17 a.m., the train rolled in. Not long, just 4 wagons, but the uniform stepping out of the first car was unmistakable. Field Captain Otto Hess, broad shoulders, thin mustache, an officer's swagger wrapped in self-importance. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, not from fear, from entitlement. Nathan watched him speak with the station manager, tapping a clipboard. Then he wandered alone to the side of the platform, near a patch of shade. Nathan followed, quiet, natural. He carried a rusted wrench in his belt. Nothing suspicious, just a tool. He stood beside Hess, didn't speak. Hess turned, annoyed. "Do I know you?" Nathan's eyes didn't blink. "You signed the clearance for the April transports." What are you talking about?" The wrench hit bone. Once, twice. Hess collapsed into the weeds, blood pooling in the dust. No screams, no alarms. The train departed 15 minutes later. No one checked the bushes. Nathan left that night, a different man again. Not because of the act, because of what he'd felt while doing it. Nothing. The next letter came wrapped inside a sausage casing, delivered by a butcher's boy in Bremen. 2 more. After that, your debt's paid. But remember, you weren't a witness. You were consequence. The final name was someone he recognized. Erich Halberstadt, a man Nathan had seen once during his early mechanic days, back when inspections were performed with barking dogs and slaps to the face. Halberstadt had ordered a woman dragged off a train for hiding bread in her coat. She was beaten to death on the platform. Nathan never forgot the sound, not the screams, the silence after. He found Halberstadt near Hamburg, living under a different name, a pensioner's beard, working as a port inspector now, far from the uniforms and spotlights. Nathan waited until the man walked home. He followed him into a side alley. No grand confrontation, no speech, just a rope, a pipe overhead, and gravity. Nathan didn't stay to watch him swing. The list was done, but the war wasn't, and neither was Nathan. One day, years later, in a small village bookstore in Belgium, a man found an old children's doll on a shelf, stuffed, stitched, with a red thread around its neck. Inside was a folded paper, faded, typed, no name, just a line. "I was not a witness. I was consequence." It was the garden that told him everything. Not the guards, not the documents, not even the silence of the villagers. It was the garden, the way the grass was cut too precisely, the way the hedges stood like green statues frozen in obedience. That was how Nathan knew this place wasn't just a farm. It was a stage. 3 weeks had passed since the cellar, since the doll had been returned, since Kruger had found his children dead and strung himself up in a room where he once signed orders with gold-tipped pens. Nathan had walked through forests, fields, and bomb-split roads, but something kept pulling him back toward that house, toward the garden, not out of nostalgia, out of necessity, because something was still wrong. The village near the estate had changed. Subtle, but real. People spoke less. Doors stayed closed. And the bakery, once full of chatter and burnt crust, now offered only silence and perfect rolls. Too perfect, too measured, like someone had told them, pretend nothing happened. Nathan didn't pretend, he watched. He rented a room in a farmhouse just 3 kilometers out, claiming to be a railway inspector recovering from injury. The old couple who hosted him didn't ask much. Everyone was tired of asking, tired of losing things. Sons, daughters, faces. From the attic window, with a borrowed scope, Nathan could see the north edge of the Kruger estate. New guards had arrived, not SS, not Wehrmacht, civilian clothes, stern eyes, pale knuckles. These weren't soldiers, these were cleaners. They weren't here to protect the place, they were here to erase it. Every evening at exactly 18 how, a man came out to the garden and trimmed the same hedge, always the same one, even when it didn't need trimming. Nathan watched him for 4 nights. Same hat, same gait, same pattern of steps. On the 5th night, Nathan moved closer. He left the attic after sundown, crossing the old fence line through a ditch that hadn't been repaired since before the winter. His boots sank into thawed mud. The cold wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft now, the kind that pretends to leave before coming back worse. He carried nothing but the doll, always the doll. It was tucked into the inner lining of his coat, pressed against his chest. The red thread had frayed on one end. He hadn't fixed it. It reminded him not to fix things that were meant to stay broken. He reached the garden wall just before the man appeared, watched from between 2 bricks, motionless. The hedge was already perfect, but the man kept trimming. Nathan knew routine when he saw it. The man wasn't gardening, he was waiting. At 1807, a second man joined him. Shorter, thinner. They didn't speak, just exchanged a small brown envelope. Nathan memorized the gesture, the handoff, the way the second man walked back toward the house, careful not to step on the flower beds. It was theater, and Nathan had seen enough plays to know that props always meant something. That night, he returned to the attic and opened his old sketchbook, the one where he had drawn the estate from memory. Each line a breath held, each window a possibility. He circled the hedge. He wrote, "Drop point, every evening, 18-2. Watch for return courier." Underneath, he wrote something else. What are they hiding that even the war couldn't destroy? The answer came 2 nights later. Nathan followed the second man from the hedge. He trailed him through a narrow path behind the house, past the smokehouse, down into a small brick cellar near the eastern field. The man looked over his shoulder once. Nothing unusual, just another dark shape in a village full of ghosts. Nathan waited 30 minutes, then crept forward. No guards, no locks, just a heavy wooden door and a silence too deliberate to be natural. He opened it, slowly. Inside, shelves of documents, crates, rolled maps, a typewriter without ribbon, and in the corner, covered in a gray cloth, a filing cabinet scorched at the top. He stepped closer. The drawers were labeled in faint pencil. Transfers, East, clearances, non-German, agricultural, covert. He opened the first drawer. Inside were forms, stamped, dated, initialed by names he recognized. Kruger, Halberstadt, Neumann, the same men from the list, the same men from the nightmares. Nathan's hands didn't shake, they clenched. He pulled a form from mid-stack. A name leapt out. Rivka Levinson, female, 31, Jewish origin, agricultural relocation, no return. His eyes blurred, not from grief, from clarity. This was it, the machine behind the curtain. The garden was just a mask, the house, a disguise. These files, these lies, this was the real war. He took only one paper, folded it, slipped it into the doll's lining, and left the rest to rot. Back in the attic, he lit a single candle and stared at the paper for hours, not reading, just remembering. How Rivka smiled when she peeled potatoes, how Miriam liked to hum when she thought no one was listening, how a man with a pen signed their lives into silence. Nathan didn't cry. He hadn't since the truck, but he whispered something, a prayer maybe, or a curse, in Yiddish, soft, sharp, like a knife behind teeth. The next morning the shed was gone, burned, no smoke seen, no alarms raised. It had vanished, like it had never existed, but Nathan had the paper. And now, he had something else. Names, lots of them, thousands, every transfer, every relocation, every file that someone tried to erase. He didn't have guns, or allies, or safety, but he had evidence, and he had nothing left to lose. They would say later that no one knew where Nathan Levinson went after that spring, that he disappeared like so many others, that the war swallowed him, that the records were lost. But sometimes in quiet rooms, in late-night whispers passed between those who had survived the camps, his name surfaced, the mechanic, the one with the doll, the one who turned the house into a grave, and then kept digging. Some men fight with guns, some with words. Nathan Levinson fought with inches. He didn't rush. He studied. He didn't strike twice in the same way. He listened for the cracks in the floorboards, the pause in a breath, the exact moment when one blink takes just a fraction too long. Because in this kind of war, the one fought behind fences and clean uniforms, it wasn't the bold who survived. It was the patient, the ghosts, the ones who knew how to vanish between footsteps. After the cellar, after the garden, after the fire that erased the records, Nathan didn't run. He circled back. Why? Because they still didn't understand what he was. They thought they'd buried him in that house, but they'd only burned the curtains. The stage was still standing, and Nathan wasn't finished performing. He returned to the village in late May, posed as a carpenter hired to repair war-damaged roofs. The uniform was simple: corduroy trousers, a wool cap, nails in his pocket. No one asked questions. Every man in that town had someone to bury or forget. But Nathan didn't forget. Every morning he walked past the ruins of the Kruger estate. The outer wall still stood, chipped and blackened. The garden was gone, ripped out by the roots, replaced by dirt and shame. But the bones of the place remained, and so did the patterns. He began testing the terrain again, quietly. He'd brush his foot over a patch of gravel and note the shift in weight. He'd knock lightly on a beam and listen for the hollow echo of rot. He memorized the sun's position at every hour it passed through the broken glass of the southern windows, and slowly he rebuilt the map, not on paper, in muscle, in breath, in silence. 3 weeks in, Nathan noticed a change, a new presence. The house wasn't as abandoned as it pretended to be. Late at night, faint lights flickered behind the remaining shutters. A lantern glow, too controlled for accident. Once he caught the echo of a cough. Another time a door creaked, not from wind, but from intent. Someone was living inside the ghost of Kruger's empire. Nathan waited. He didn't try to enter. Not yet. Instead, he laid his markers. First, he moved a stone at the back path, just a small one, barely visible to the untrained eye, but if it was disturbed, he'd know. Second, he loosened the third step on the east side of the porch, a deliberate break. If someone stepped wrong, they'd hear it, and so would he. Third, he scraped a sliver of wood from the doorframe of the pantry entrance. Not enough to damage it, just enough to leave a scar, a fingerprint of presence. By the end of the week, 2 of the 3 signs had changed. The stone had been moved, the step had been secured, but the scar on the frame remained. Whoever was there knew someone was watching, and they wanted Nathan to know that they knew. He wasn't dealing with ordinary soldiers anymore. This wasn't the SS. This wasn't the Gestapo. This was something else, something quieter, cleaner, more dangerous. One evening he spotted her. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't even armed. She wore a dark wool dress, hair pinned back, gloves too clean for village work. She walked the grounds with measured steps, like she had once memorized the layout too, like she was remembering, not discovering. Nathan followed her from a distance. She didn't go into the house. She walked its perimeter, checked the ground, paused near the ruined fountain, knelt briefly, then stood again and walked away. She didn't see him, but when she passed the broken wall at the garden's edge, she left something on the stone, a red thread. Nathan waited until nightfall to retrieve it. He wrapped the thread around his finger, same thickness, same color, exactly like the one on Miriam's doll. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a clue. It was a message. I know who you are. I know what happened here. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He sat in the attic of his borrowed house, the thread on the table, the doll beside it, and a map of scars drawn in his mind. Someone else was watching the watchers, and they weren't trying to stop him. They were calling him. The next morning, he returned to the ruins before sunrise. The air still held the bitterness of old smoke and moss. He crossed the yard without sound, retracing old steps, the ones that had once led him to Franz, to Dieter, to Hans. But he wasn't here to relive. He was here to read. He crouched beside the fountain where the woman had paused, brushed away the leaves. There it was, scratched into the stone, faint but real. A name, W. Bergen, and below it, Tuesday, midnight, alone. That night was the longest of Nathan's life. He didn't know if it was a trap, didn't care. There were no more lines left to cross, only shadows. He arrived early, 23:30, waited by the fountain, nothing. Then, at 0:03, footsteps, soft, deliberate. She appeared from the trees, no lantern, just her shape, framed in the dying moonlight. She stopped 5 paces away. I thought you'd be taller, she said. Her accent was German, educated, tired. Nathan didn't speak. You killed them, she continued. Kruger's boys. He nodded once. No pride, no regret. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded document. This was supposed to be destroyed, she said. But I kept a copy. She handed it to him. He opened it. It was a manifest. Names, birth dates, transfer locations, all fake. Under agricultural labor, Rivka's name, and Miriam's. Status, relocated. Final destination, undisclosed. Authorization, W. Bergen. Nathan looked up. "Who's Bergen?" She hesitated, then said, "He was Kruger's handler, the one who signed off on what Kruger couldn't stomach. Where is he?" She exhaled. "Still alive, somewhere near Leipzig, off the books. The Reich has people like that, men who don't wear medals because their work is too dirty for display." Nathan folded the paper. "I need a name, a location." She looked at him, eyes heavy with understanding. "I'll give you both," she said, "but there's a price." He waited. "I want to be there when he falls." They didn't speak as they walked. There were no handshakes, no names exchanged, no formalities. Just two shadows moving through a dead forest toward a man who never should have survived the war he helped create. Nathan didn't ask her why she kept the document. He already knew. People don't keep evidence unless they're waiting for the right moment to use it or the right person to deliver it. She introduced herself only once, in a voice that barely moved the air. Ilse. That was enough. Ilse had mapped Bergen's new life with the precision of someone who had once served the system and now bled just beneath its skin. She told Nathan everything on the way. He was living under a false name, Werner Baum, a bureaucratic ghost tucked away in a fortified guest house just outside Leipzig, assigned to internal agricultural logistics. The euphemism, like always, was a shroud for genocide. He still wore a ring with the eagle, still smoked imported French tobacco, still received envelopes from Berlin twice a month with red wax seals, protected, hidden, untouched. Not for long. They traveled by foot for 2 days, switching routes and hopping onto abandoned freight cars when the roads became too exposed. Nathan said little. He didn't need to. Ilse filled the space with facts. Bergen's routines, his guards, the location of his quarters, the layout of the guest house, the woods behind it, the way the kitchen chimney smoked at exactly 17:45 every evening. She had watched him for months, but she didn't strike. Not because she was afraid, Nathan could see it in her eyes, but because she knew the difference between vengeance and precision. "You don't make men like Bergen vanish," she said. "You make them echo." They arrived on a fog-soaked Monday night. The guest house was a stone building at the edge of a forgotten rail spur, surrounded by a thinning line of birch trees. One entrance in the front, 2 windows to the side, and a rear shed used by staff. 2 guards, lazy, civilian contractors, paid in coin and ignorance. Bergen's room was on the 2nd floor, corner left. Light always on until midnight. Nathan watched from a ditch for 3 hours. Ilse handed him the final piece, a list. Names, children, transport dates. Bergen's initials next to each. At the bottom, 2 names stood alone. Rivka Levinson, Miriam Levinson. Understatus, unfit for labor. The ink burned through his gloves. Tuesday, midnight. The fog was thicker than any night prior, as if the forest itself wanted this over with. Ilse stayed behind, eyes fixed on the house. No goodbyes, just a nod. Nathan moved. He crossed the backfield with the silence of someone who had memorized death's rhythm. Every step was calculated, every breath timed with the creak of the trees. At the side window, he paused. The shutters weren't fully closed. Bergen's silhouette passed once, then twice. Nathan pulled the latch, slid the window up just enough, slipped inside. The air was stale, rich with pipe smoke and old leather. He stepped onto the carpet barefoot. The door to the study was ajar. Inside, Bergen was hunched over a desk, scribbling notes in a thick ledger. A gramophone played something soft, almost sad. A contradiction. Nathan took 3 steps. The 3rd one creaked. Bergen turned. His eyes didn't go wide. He didn't scream. He stared. "You," he said. Nathan didn't answer. Bergen stood slowly, placing the pen down as if he were finishing a letter to a friend. "I've seen your face," he said. "In reports. You're the mechanic." Nathan stepped closer. "You put my wife and daughter on a train," he said. "I authorized movement," Bergen replied. "That's what I did. Movement. I didn't choose who got off and who didn't." Nathan's jaw tightened. "You knew what those destinations meant." Bergen didn't blink. "I knew what war meant." A pause. Then Nathan reached into his coat, not for a weapon, for the doll. He placed it on the desk. Bergen stared at it. The red thread. "This was hers," Nathan said. "My daughter's." For the first time, Bergen's posture changed. "I have grandchildren," he muttered. Nathan leaned in. "They will never know your name, only what you did." There was no struggle. Nathan used the same cloth Bergen had stamped thousands of papers on. A single twist. Silent. Personal. Bergen collapsed over his desk. The pen snapped under his chest. The gramophone kept playing. Nathan took the ledger. He exited the house the same way he entered, through shadow. Ilse was waiting, as promised. "Is it done?" Nathan nodded. He didn't beg. She smirked faintly. They never do. They already begged once in their own way, when they created lies and called it order. She handed him a small tin. Inside, Matches. One was marked with a red stripe. Second floor, closet beside the desk. Burn it all. Nathan turned back, lit the match, and disappeared once more into fire. They left Leipzig before sunrise. No one pursued. No alarms rang. The house burned for hours. By dawn, there was nothing but smoke and silence. Ilsa parted from him at a train junction 2 towns west. "This is the end," she said. Nathan didn't argue. He looked down at the doll, then at the ledger, then at her. "You ever wonder if we're just shadows now?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, we're consequences." And with that, she vanished into the gray of the tracks. Nathan never saw her again. But 3 months later, a box arrived at a resistance outpost near the French border. Inside, the ledger Bergen's name, the doll, a single line written on a torn scrap of paper. "Justice is a slow train, but it never stops." The box sat untouched for hours. No one at the outpost wanted to open it first. It arrived without a courier, without a name, just a parcel left near the barn door before dawn, the frost still clinging to its corners. Inside, a ledger bound in cracked leather, a child's doll with a red thread around its neck, and a folded scrap of brown paper, scrawled in ink, barely legible. "Justice is a slow train, but it never stops." Nathan Levinson didn't sign it. He didn't have to. They passed the ledger around like contraband, not because of what it was, but because of what it proved. Names, places, dates, more than 500 entries, each one stamped, authorized, and initialed by men who'd long since disappeared into the mist of war bureaucracy. Each entry linked to a family uprooted, a body never found, a child never seen again. At the end of the ledger, the last few pages were marked differently. Red ink, crossed out names, and next to them, small notations. Kruger, resolved. Halberstadt, resolved. Bergen, resolved. A pattern, an audit, a reckoning. The outpost commander, a wiry man known only as Lemoyne, summoned Nathan 3 days after receiving the box. They met in a farmhouse cellar lit by a single oil lamp. The air was heavy with mold and the ghost of gunpowder. Nathan sat, calm as ever, the doll on the table between them. Lemoyne leaned forward. "You've been busy." Nathan didn't answer. Lemoyne flipped open the ledger. "This is gold, but it's also death. You understand that, yes?" Nathan's voice was low. "I've lived with both." Lemoyne nodded. "We've cross-checked 3 entries already. Names that match testimonies from survivors in Austria. A mother, a priest, even a rail worker who was forced to mark the cars." He closed the book. "This ledger could collapse entire careers, entire myths." Nathan looked him in the eye. "Then what are you waiting for?" But it wasn't that simple. The resistance wasn't a single beast. It was 100 limbs crawling in different directions. Some wanted liberation, others revenge, and many wanted only survival. The ledger, as powerful as it was, threatened to bring light to shadows people had learned to live with. Some factions warned against releasing the names. Too risky, too late, too close to the Allies. But Lemoyne believed, not in Nathan, but in the truth buried inside ink and silence. He made copies, handwritten, one by one. The originals he kept hidden. The ledger itself he gave back to Nathan. "What am I supposed to do with it?" Nathan asked. Lemoyne lit a cigarette. "You started this. You want me to finish it?" Lemoyne exhaled. "No, I want you to make sure it never gets erased again." So Nathan disappeared once more. This time, not to kill, but to preserve. He carried the ledger in a satchel beneath his coat, the doll always with it. He moved between towns under different names: courier, gravedigger, carpenter, cook. He left copies of pages at safe houses, churches, schools, some in jars buried beneath trees, some sewn into the linings of coats, one hidden inside the hollow of a broken violin. The war raged on, louder in some places than others. But Nathan no longer followed the guns. He followed truth. Wherever the names had bled, he went. One day, in a village near the Swiss border, he met a boy, 12, maybe 13, selling old buttons and scraps of cloth outside a destroyed post office. The boy held out a patch stitched with red thread. Nathan froze. He held out a coin and asked, "Where did you get this?" The boy shrugged. "A woman came last week, gave it to my sister, told her to hold on to it, said someone would know what it meant." Nathan took the patch. Inside it, barely visible, was a scrap of paper. 3 more names, 1 address, a message in familiar handwriting. "They're still alive, for now." Signed, Ilsa. That night, Nathan studied the names under candlelight. One of them he recognized instantly. Franz Bauer, a clerk who once signed off mass deportations from Hungary. Rumor had it he'd disappeared, taken on a new life in the mountains under Vatican protection, hiding as a monastery steward. The others were less known, quiet men, paper men, but dangerous. He closed the ledger, folded the new page into it. and began walking. But something was changing in him. He no longer walked with anger or with vengeance. He walked like someone who had seen death, spoken with it, and survived the conversation. The doll no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a compass. In early autumn, while crossing the border into Italy under false documents, he was stopped by a patrol. The officer, a young man, maybe 20, searched his bag, found the ledger, flipped through the names, then looked at Nathan. "What is this?" Nathan said only one word: "Proof." The officer studied him, then closed the book and handed it back. "Godspeed," he said. By year's end, copies of the ledger had reached at least 5 resistance hubs across Europe. A priest in Rome quoted one of its entries during a midnight sermon. A radio operator in Lyon read 5 names aloud before cutting transmission. A nurse in Krakow found a page hidden inside a loaf of bread. And in Berlin, an officer's widow received an anonymous envelope. Inside, a single name, her husband's, stamped, dated, and crossed out in red. Nathan's name never appeared in reports. No medals, no statues, no grave. But the legend spread in whispers. The mechanic, the doll, the ledger, the man who made silence speak. One winter, years later, a museum curator in Prague found an unmarked box buried beneath a collapsed library. Inside, a child's doll, a thread, a book of names, and a note. "I wasn't a witness, I was consequence. The war was ending." You could feel it in the silence between explosions, in the way soldiers carried themselves. Less like conquerors, more like men wondering what they'd done. Towns once draped in swastikas now bore only broken windows and burnt bread. The flags came down. The questions rose up. But for Nathan Levinson, the end of the war didn't mean peace, because peace comes with names, with graves, with closure. He had none, only pages and echoes. By March of 1945, Nathan was in Austria, walking alone through valleys where entire villages had been emptied like barns. The snow was melting, but the blood hadn't washed away. People were crawling out of forests, some with numbers burned into their skin, some too tired to speak. He passed a man on a bridge outside Linz. No coat, hollow face, eyes sunken so deep they looked carved. Nathan gave him half a loaf of bread. The man took it, then asked in Yiddish, "Are you the one with the book?" Nathan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Word had spread, quietly, like smoke through broken walls. Not about his name, no one remembered that, but about the ledger, the doll, the man who didn't forget. In resistance circles, he was called Der Schattenrichter, the shadow judge. In whispered camp stories, he was just the mechanic who returned. And for those who had seen too much, he was something else entirely. Consequence made flesh. He kept moving. Each village brought new names, most already lost to fire or frost. But once in a while, someone would pass him a scrap of paper, a clue, a rumor. He collected them like a priest collects confessions. Then, in a crumbling chapel in Salzburg, a woman handed him a sealed envelope. She didn't speak. She just pressed it into his palm and left. Inside were 2 names, Franz Bauer Elias Schwartz, and one note typed, "Last seen in northern Italy, protected, posing as clergy, Vatican corridor." The clergy. Nathan had heard whispers about them, the safe routes for high-ranking officers, cleaned and blessed by sympathizers in cassocks. Some claimed they were smuggled across the Alps. Others said they vanished into Spanish monasteries. Nathan didn't care where they were going. He only cared that they thought they were safe. It took him 12 days to cross into Italy. He wore priest's clothes stolen from a body half buried in the snow, said little, kept the doll in his coat. He arrived in Bolzano, a mountain town thick with German escapees posing as pilgrims. The churches were full of silence, the confessional booths more crowded than the altars. He watched, he waited. Then, on the 5th day, he saw him, Franz Bauer, thinner, older, but the mouth, tight, judgmental, was unmistakable. He moved through the sanctuary like a man who still believed the world owed him absolution. He wore a crucifix, but Nathan had the ledger, and memory doesn't forgive. That night, he followed Bauer through the alleys behind the church. Bauer never saw him, not when Nathan pinned him to the wall, not when the cloth slipped over his mouth, not when he whispered, "This is not redemption, this is recall." Bauer died without saying a word. Nathan left him slumped in a pew, the crucifix turned upside down. The next morning, the village priest called it a tragic heart failure. No one questioned it. No one ever did. Elias Schwartz was harder. He had connections, disguises, a new name, Father Petrosini. He ran a mission house near Genoa, feeding the poor with one hand while erasing his past with the other. But Nathan had become fluent in shadows. He posed as a mute laborer, dug latrines, cooked, waited, until one night, Schwartz invited him in for wine, said he liked men who didn't talk. He poured 2 glasses, smiled, offered cheers, Nathan drank, then placed the doll on the table. Schwartz's smile faded. He stared at it, the red thread. "What is this?" he asked. Nathan finally spoke. "Your reckoning." The wine was laced, not to kill, just to slow. Schwartz tried to run, made it 3 steps. Nathan caught him by the collar and whispered, "You signed off on children. You counted them like cattle." Schwartz begged, cried, prayed. Nathan didn't answer. He used no blade, no rope, just the ledger. He read names aloud, one by one, as Schwartz faded. Each name a sentence, each pause, a stone laid over a grave. By summer, Nathan was on the move again. The Allies were sweeping in. Trials were being announced. Papers were being burned as fast as they were printed. The world wanted to move on, but Nathan wasn't finished. In a town near Marseille, he delivered the ledger to a woman who ran an underground archive. She took it like a relic, promised to make more copies, swore on her own son's grave. Nathan didn't ask for thanks. He asked for one thing: let the names speak. She nodded. He spent the rest of the war in silence, watching trains, watching faces. Sometimes he'd see a child holding a doll, and he'd have to sit down. Other times, he'd find a red thread on the ground and wonder if it was real, or just something his mind needed to see. He didn't kill again. He didn't have to. The ledger had done what blades couldn't. It remembered. Years later, in a rebuilt Berlin, a young journalist found a sealed box in the floorboards of her apartment. Inside, a doll, a red thread, a book of names, and a final note. No signature. Just 5 words. Echoes don't need names. The war ended with parades Nathan never saw. Men danced in streets with flags they hadn't dared wave in years. Families embraced ruins like home again. Names long thought dead were called out in roll calls. Some answered, most didn't. Nathan Levinson was nowhere on those lists. No one celebrated the man who walked through fire carrying a doll and a ledger. No one gave medals to ghosts. By the autumn of 1945, he had no address, no homeland, no paper to prove he had ever existed. He moved through cities like a rumor, always just left of the truth. A coat, a scarf, a slow limp. People remembered the doll more than the face. In Lyon, a nurse swore she saw him standing outside a hospital for 3 nights straight, watching the Red Cross wagons arrive. In Prague, an archivist found a sealed envelope beneath a broken shelf with a list of names and one note: "These men don't belong to history, they belong to memory." In Vienna, a rabbi claimed a man entered his synagogue, placed a child's toy on the altar, and walked out before dawn. The rabbi wept for an hour after, but none of them knew where he slept, or whether he ate, or what name he answered to, if any, because Nathan had become the thing he had hunted, a shadow. The ledger was no longer in his hands. He had scattered it in pieces, across languages, across borders, across belief. It could never be destroyed now. Too many copies, too many whispers, too many people unwilling to forget. But the doll remained with him, tucked into the inner lining of a coat that now hung loose on his thinner frame. The red thread was frayed beyond repair, and yet he never touched it. Some wounds aren't meant to close. One night, in a small fishing village near Calais, Nathan collapsed on a bench near the docks. The sea was rough. The stars were few. A boy approached him, barefoot, sunburnt, no older than 6. The boy stared at him. "You lost, mister?" Nathan shook his head slowly. The boy pointed to his coat. "That doll yours?" Nathan looked down, smiled faintly. "No, she belongs to someone I couldn't bring back." The boy blinked. "Is she waiting for you?" Nathan said nothing, then whispered, "No, she's the reason I kept going." The boy thought about that, then nodded, like he understood something far beyond his years. In the early days of 1946, an American journalist compiling testimonies for the tribunals received an anonymous letter. Inside, a page from the ledger, a list of 20 names, and a final entry written by hand. Justice is not punishment, it's memory. There was no return address, but taped to the inside of the envelope was a red thread. Time passed. The world got busy. Germany was rebuilt. Flags changed. Allies became enemies. Monuments rose in places where graves never would. People told stories when they felt brave enough, and stayed quiet when they didn't. But every few years, in towns far apart, someone would swear, "I saw him, the man with the doll. He didn't say much, but he looked at you like he knew who you'd forgotten." He was spotted once near a train yard in Warsaw, watching, listening. Once near a field of white stones in Normandy, standing in the rain with no umbrella. And once, only once, in Jerusalem, placing a folded piece of paper between stones of an old wall. No one read it, but those who saw him swore he smiled, just a little, before turning and vanishing into the crowd. They say he died in the 1950s, or maybe the 60s. There was no body, no funeral, no marker. But one day, a gravedigger outside Krakow found a satchel buried beneath a willow tree. Inside, a rusted wrench, a child's cloth doll, a book with missing pages, and a note that read, "If you're reading this, you've remembered enough. You don't need to know my name, only what I did when no one else would." Today, if you walk certain train tracks in Eastern Europe, you might find a small red thread tied to a spike, or a name carved into wood where it doesn't belong, or a whisper from an old man who once saw a stranger step off a platform and disappear into the trees. He won't tell you a name, only a sentence. He didn't scream when they took his family. He memorized the face, and the world was never the same. He was not a witness. He was consequence. If this kind of story keeps you hooked, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear what no one else had the courage to tell.